Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. What a beautiful passage we have today in our whole story devotional series. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And you've probably heard this passage before if you've ever been to a wedding or maybe a marriage conference. And while it is applicable to a marriage relationship, Paul actually wrote this to the people in a church in Corinth.
Yeah, and the church at Corinth had all kinds of problems. If you've been reading through 1 Corinthians, you've seen many of them. But the biggest problem they had, and probably the reason that Paul wrote this letter in the first place, was their disunity. The church in Corinth was filled with bickering and infighting, where people were arguing all the time about their spiritual gifts. And in 1 Corinthians 12, Paul addresses that issue. The church was arguing about who had what gift and which gifts were more important or higher profile. And Paul challenges them and says, what are you doing, right? This is not what your spiritual gifts are for, but God has given each person gifts to serve the church. In fact, he compares the church to one body with many parts. And while people might have different roles, no one role is more important than the other. The body's only able to function when all the individual parts work together in unison. And after addressing spiritual gifts and talking about their unity, Paul pauses and he brings up the trait that is going to help the church in Corinth actually live in unity. And that trait is love.
And he gives a bunch of beautiful descriptions of what love is, but there's one specific phrase that David and I want to focus on, and it's love keeps no record of wrongs.
Yeah, and I've heard this story, this passage since I was young, and I've never thought of me as really struggling with that one, the idea of keeping no record of wrongs. I've always felt like it was easy for me to forgive other people. But I remember when Natalie and I got married, we joined a community group, and we started to go to the group, and we were doing a Bible study, and the pastor was talking about this exact passage, 1 Corinthians 13. And when he got to that line about love keeping no record of wrongs, he said it could be retranslated to love doesn't keep score. And I remember immediately feeling guilt rush over me as a newlywed with my wife, thinking, oh man, I do that all the time. I maybe don't verbalize it, but anytime that Natalie unintentionally hurt my feelings or, wronged me in some way, in my mind, I check the scoreboard in my head. And I think of all the times that I had done great things, kind things, sweet things. And I think, how could she treat me that way? And I would check the scoreboard all the time. And so I realized that I was keeping a record of wrongs. But then what I realized even more was it's not just in my marriage relationship I do this. We do this in all of our relationships. Right, with a coworker, we think, you didn't help me out on that project we had to get done, so why would I help you this time? Or maybe with a sibling, we think, I helped you move, it's your time to pay up, right? Or, with someone at church, a brother or sister in Christ was supposed to come through, come serve or come to a community group meeting, and they don't show up. And doesn't it just impact the way that we think about them, or the next time we see them, the way that we interact with them? We tend to hold on to those things. We keep a record of wrongs. But Christ-like love doesn't keep score. It doesn't keep a record of wrongs.
Right. Yeah. And this is something I have personally struggled with for most of my life. I keep a record of wrongs. I keep score of what other people have done to me. And in order to protect myself from getting my feelings hurt intentionally or unintentionally, I abandon the relationship. I back off, and it slowly kills all the relationships that I have. And after being married to David for a very short time, I quickly realized, I can't do this in my marriage. I can't just abandon the relationship. My relationship with David will die. It's a poison to it. I need to be willing to forgive him and to forget the things he's done and not drag them back up when we're having our next fight. And I need to do this in all of my relationships with my brothers and sisters in Christ. We're all saved by Jesus, but we still sin. We still unintentionally hurt and offend each other. And if we're a church of people who keeps a record of wrongs of what other brothers and sisters in Christ have done to us, it's going to slowly pull the church apart. And that's the opposite of what Jesus wants for us. And that's the opposite way of how Jesus wants us to love and treat people.
That's right, and that's where Natalie and I want to end this devotional time with today. This idea that we recognize that we've fallen short in this definition of love in countless ways. But the beautiful thing is that we serve a God who follows this definition of love to the letter. Our God, Jesus Christ, keeps no record of wrongs. Jesus Christ does not check the scoreboard. And let's be honest, I'm so glad he doesn't, because if he checked the scoreboard, it would not look pretty for either of us. And see, but we serve a God who's loved us. Even while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And so if we are loved in that way, it's our challenge that Paul gives the church in Corinth, and I think still gives us today, that we need to love one another that way. When our brothers and sisters in Christ wrong us, we have to make the conscious decision to say, I'm not going to keep score here. I am not going to keep this in the record book of all the times you've wronged me. Instead, because of what Christ has done for me, I'm going to forgive that person and show them grace and mercy. And only when we do that will we have unity as a church. So I hope that you consider that with us today. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. You guys have a great day.